The afternoon sun beat down on Officer James Wilson as he sat in his patrol car, parked on the side of a quiet suburban road. The dashboard clock read 4:37 p.m., just over an hour left in his shift. This wasn't supposed to be his day to work. He'd covered for a colleague yesterday and now found himself pulling a double. His eyes were heavy, his patience thin. The radio crackled with routine updates. Nothing exciting had happened all day. Just the usual traffic violations, a minor fender bender downtown and a false alarm at the local high school. Wilson sipped his lukewarm coffee and grimaced. The bitter taste matched his mood. He glanced at his phone. 3 missed calls from his ex-wife. Something about their son's baseball game next weekend. Wilson sighed and set the phone down. He'd deal with that later. A black SUV with tinted windows passed by, slightly exceeding the speed limit. Wilson straightened up. The vehicle matched the description of one reportedly involved in a convenience store incident last week. The windows were tinted darker than legally permitted in the state. 2 violations right there. Finally, something interesting, Wilson muttered as he started the engine. He flipped on his lights and pulled out behind the SUV. The SUV continued for another block before smoothly pulling over. Wilson called in the license plate number and location before stepping out of his vehicle. The dispatcher's voice came back with confirmation that the plates were registered to a private owner. No flags or warrants. Wilson approached the SUV with caution. The tinted windows prevented him from seeing inside. His hand instinctively rested on his holster, a habit formed over 15 years on the force. He'd been taught to expect the worst and hope for the best. "License and registration," Wilson called out, standing slightly behind the driver's side door. No response. The window remained up. Wilson's heart rate quickened. In training, they'd watched countless videos of routine traffic stops gone wrong. Officers approaching vehicles only to be met with gunfire. The dark tint. The delayed response. His mind rapidly connected dots that weren't necessarily there. "Roll down your window now," Wilson commanded, his voice rising. Still nothing. He unsnapped his holster and drew his weapon, pointing it at the driver's side window. "Last warning. Roll down your window and show me your hands." The window began to lower, moving down slowly and smoothly. Wilson tightened his grip on his weapon, aiming at where the driver's head would be. As the window descended, Wilson found himself staring not at a criminal, but at a distinguished older man in full military dress uniform. 4 silver stars gleamed on each shoulder. The man's face showed no fear, just quiet dignity and slight confusion. His hands remained visible on the steering wheel, exactly where they should be. The world seemed to stop. Wilson's arm suddenly felt heavy, as if his gun had doubled in weight. He was pointing his weapon at a high-ranking military officer, a lieutenant general in the United States Army. "Is there a problem, officer?" the general asked calmly, his deep voice steady and controlled. Wilson lowered his weapon immediately, his hand trembling slightly. Shame washed over him like a cold wave. "Sir, I need to see your license and registration, please." The general nodded slowly. "May I reach for my wallet?" "It's in my inside jacket pocket." Wilson nodded, holstering his weapon. "Yes, sir. Go ahead." The general's movements were deliberate and careful as he retrieved his wallet and vehicle registration. Wilson accepted the documents with an unsteady hand. The name on the license read Lieutenant General Robert Washington. Wilson recognized the name immediately. General Washington had been featured in the news recently, discussing military operations and veteran support programs. He was one of the highest-ranking black officers in the U.S. military, with a distinguished 30-year career. "Do you know why I pulled you over today, sir?" Wilson asked, his voice noticeably softer. "I'm afraid I don't, officer," the general replied, maintaining eye contact. "I was traveling at the speed limit and obeying all traffic laws." Wilson cleared his throat. "Your windows appear to be tinted beyond the legal limit, and you were going 5 miles over the speed limit." "I see," the general said. "The vehicle was recently serviced at the Pentagon Motor Pool. If the tint isn't in compliance, I'll have it addressed immediately. As for the speed, I was matching traffic flow, but I'll be more mindful in the future." Wilson nodded, suddenly unsure of himself. The dash cam was recording everything. His approach with weapon drawn, now this conversation. He glanced back at his patrol car, acutely aware that his actions would be reviewed. "May I ask why you approached my vehicle with your weapon drawn, Officer Wilson?" the general asked, reading the name from Wilson's badge. The question hung in the air between them. Wilson felt his face grow hot. Standard procedure when a vehicle with tinted windows doesn't immediately comply with instructions, he said, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. The general's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected something deeper, not anger, but a weariness. The look of a man who had seen this before many times. I didn't hear your initial request, the general explained. The vehicle is soundproofed for security reasons, given my position. I lowered the window as soon as I realized you were there. Wilson swallowed hard. He looked down at the license and registration in his hands, then back at the general. In his 15 years on the force, he'd never felt so immediately and completely wrong. I'm going to run your information and be right back. Sir, Wilson said, retreating to his patrol car. Inside his vehicle, Wilson sat for a moment without moving. His hands were still shaking slightly. He'd drawn his weapon on a 4-star general, a man who commanded thousands of troops and had likely served his country longer than Wilson had been alive. He ran the license through the system, though he already knew what would come back. General Washington's record was spotless, as expected. Wilson stared at the computer screen, seeing but not really reading the information displayed there. What had made him so quick to draw his weapon? Was it really just the tinted windows and delayed response? Or was there something else, something he didn't want to acknowledge? Wilson's phone buzzed again. Another call from his ex-wife. He ignored it and stepped back out of the patrol car. As he approached the SUV again, he noticed another military officer in the passenger seat, a colonel based on the insignia, looking straight ahead, expression carefully neutral. Everything checks out. General Washington, Wilson said, returning the license and registration. I apologize for the confusion and for approaching your vehicle with my weapon drawn. That was an overreaction on my part. The general accepted his documents, tucking them carefully back into his wallet. Thank you for your honesty, Officer Wilson. We all make split-second decisions in our lines of work. The important thing is to learn from them. Wilson nodded, unsure how to respond to the general's grace. You're free to go, sir. Have a safe journey. Officer, the general said before rolling up his window, I understand the pressures of your job, but I would ask you to consider why your hand went to your weapon so quickly today. That reflection might be valuable. With that, the window rolled up and the SUV pulled away smoothly. Wilson stood on the roadside, watching the vehicle disappear around a corner. His radio crackled with another call, but he didn't immediately respond. The general's words echoed in his mind. Why had his hand gone to his weapon so quickly? The question demanded an answer he wasn't sure he was ready to give. The radio crackled again, more insistently this time. Wilson keyed his mic and responded, Officer Wilson. Responding, he walked back to his patrol car, knowing that this encounter would follow him long after his shift ended. As he settled back behind the wheel, his phone lit up with a text message from his supervisor. See me before you clock out today. Wilson started the engine, a knot forming in his stomach. The dashcam footage would have already uploaded to the department server. His supervisor had likely seen everything already. The remainder of his patrol passed in a blur of self-recrimination and anxiety. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of his gun pointed at a decorated military officer who had done nothing wrong. By the time he pulled into the station parking lot, Wilson knew this day would mark a turning point in his career, and perhaps in his understanding of himself. Officer Wilson sat in the hard plastic chair outside Captain Rivera's office, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. The precinct buzzed with the usual end-of-shift activity. Officers filing reports, phones ringing, the coffee machine gurgling in the break room. Yet Wilson felt oddly detached from it all, as if watching through glass. The door to Rivera's office opened. Wilson, get in here! Wilson stood straightening his uniform shirt and stepped inside. Captain Rivera, a 25-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and permanent frown lines, gestured to a chair across from his cluttered desk. Close the door, Rivera said, his voice unnervingly calm. Wilson did as instructed and took a seat, his back rigid. Rivera tapped a few keys on his computer keyboard, then swiveled the monitor so Wilson could see it too. The dashcam footage from Wilson's patrol car filled the screen. Let's watch this together, shall we? Rivera said, clicking play. Wilson's stomach tightened as he watched himself approach the black SUV, hand already on his holster. The audio captured his increasingly aggressive commands. Then came the moment when he drew his weapon, aiming it directly at the driver's window as it lowered to reveal General Washington in full military dress. Rivera paused the video. The still image showed Wilson pointing his gun at a 4-star general of the United States Army. "Explain," Rivera said simply. Wilson cleared his throat. "The tinted windows, sir. I couldn't see inside. When there was no immediate response to my command—" "Save it," Rivera cut him off. "I've known you for 7 years, Wilson. You're better than this." He turned the monitor back around. "Do you have any idea who that is?" "Lieutenant General Robert Washington," Wilson said quietly. "Not just any general. He's the Deputy Commander of U.S. Army Forces Command. Oversees the training and readiness of more than 750,000 soldiers. Purple Heart recipient. Bronze Star. The man's a damn war hero." Wilson felt the weight of his actions grow heavier with each accolade. "Tell me what really happened out there," Rivera said, leaning back in his chair. "And I don't want to hear about procedure or tinted windows." Wilson looked down at his hands. They were steady now, unlike earlier. "I don't know, Captain. I was tired. Double shift. Personal stuff with my ex. The car matched a description from that convenience store thing last week. And when the window didn't come down right away..." He trailed off, the excuses sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "And if it had been a white woman in a minivan with tinted windows who didn't roll down immediately?" Rivera asked pointedly. The question hung in the air between them. Wilson had no answer. Rivera sighed heavily. "This isn't just about you anymore." The general's driver called it in to his commanding officer at the Pentagon. That call went to the base commander, who called the mayor, who called the chief, who called me. He ticked off each link in the chain on his fingers. And now here we are. "What happens now?" Wilson asked, his mouth dry. "Internal Affairs is already processing the paperwork. You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Badge and gun on my desk." Wilson had expected this, but hearing the words still felt like a punch to the gut. He removed his badge and service weapon, placing them carefully on Rivera's desk. "The dashcam footage will be reviewed as part of the investigation," Rivera continued. "They'll want a statement from you tomorrow. The department's official response is that we're conducting a thorough investigation and appropriate action will be taken." He paused, then added more quietly, "Off the record, you messed up bad, Wilson. Real bad." Wilson nodded, accepting the rebuke. "I know. Do you? Because I'm not sure you understand what's coming. This isn't going away with a written reprimand or sensitivity training. There's going to be pressure from the Pentagon, from City Hall, from community leaders. People will be calling for your badge permanently." Wilson felt the floor shift beneath him. 15 years on the force. It was all he knew. Go home. Talk to your union rep. Lawyer up if you need to. "And Wilson?" Rivera leaned forward. "Take a good hard look at yourself before you come back here tomorrow. I need to know if there's anything else in your history that's going to come back and bite us." Wilson stood, understanding the implicit question. Had there been other incidents? Other times when his judgment had been clouded by bias? He wanted to say no to defend his record, but doubt had crept in. "No, sir. Nothing like this." Rivera nodded, clearly unconvinced. "We'll see what the investigation turns up." Dismissed. Wilson left the office feeling naked without his badge and gun. A few fellow officers glanced his way as he walked through the bullpen, but most averted their eyes. News traveled fast in a police department. Outside, the evening air had cooled. Wilson stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, suddenly unsure where to go. Home felt wrong somehow. A bar was out of the question. He needed to think, to process what had happened. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his ex-wife. "Saw something on Twitter about an officer pulling a gun on a general. Please tell me that wasn't you." Wilson slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. He got into his car and just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, going nowhere. At the Pentagon, General Washington sat in his office reviewing the incident report his aide had prepared. Colonel Thomas Patterson, who had been in the passenger seat during the traffic stop, stood by the window gazing out at the Potomac River. "What do you think, Tom?" Washington asked, setting down the report. Patterson turned. "I think you're being remarkably calm about having a gun pointed at you during a routine traffic stop, sir." Washington smiled slightly. "Not my first rodeo." "With all due respect, sir, that's exactly the problem." Washington nodded, acknowledging the truth in Patterson's words. He'd faced similar situations before out of uniform. The first time had been in 1982, as a young lieutenant driving through Georgia. Then again in 1995 as a major in California, 2007 in Texas. Different decades, different states, same experience. The officer's name is James Wilson, Washington said. 15 years on the force. Decorated twice for bravery. One complaint for excessive force, dismissed for lack of evidence. Patterson raised an eyebrow. You've done your homework. I like to know who I'm dealing with, Washington replied. The police chief called to apologize. The mayor, too. They're launching an internal investigation. They're covering their asses, Patterson said bluntly. Perhaps. Washington stood and walked to a map of the United States on his wall. But I'm more interested in what happens next. Sir? This officer, Wilson. He seemed genuinely shocked by his own actions. There was recognition there. That's rare, Patterson shook his head. You're not seriously considering letting this slide? Not at all, Washington said firmly. But I'm considering a different approach than what they're expecting. Before Patterson could respond, Washington's phone rang. He checked the caller ID. It's the White House. The president's heard about the incident. Patterson moved toward the door. I'll give you privacy, sir. Washington nodded and answered the call. Mr. President, yes, I'm fine. No harm done. He paused, listening. Actually, sir, I have some thoughts on how we might handle this. The local news at 11 led with the story. Wilson watched from his couch, a cold, untouched beer on the coffee table before him. Breaking news tonight, the anchor began, her expression appropriately serious. A routine traffic stop turned potentially deadly when a local police officer drew his weapon on a high-ranking military official. Lieutenant General Robert Washington was pulled over earlier today for what police are calling a minor traffic violation. Sources tell us the officer approached the general's vehicle with his gun drawn. The police department has not released the officer's name but confirms he has been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. The screen showed a file photo of General Washington in his dress uniform at a military ceremony. General Washington, one of the highest-ranking black officers in the U.S. Army, has not issued a statement. However, community leaders are already calling for transparency and accountability. The broadcast cut to a local civil rights leader standing outside City Hall. This is exactly the kind of situation we've been warning about. When officers approach black citizens with weapons drawn during routine encounters, they're creating dangerous, potentially deadly situations. We're calling on the police department to release the dashcam footage and take appropriate action against the officer involved. Wilson turned off the TV. His phone had been buzzing nonstop with texts and calls from fellow officers, friends, even his mother. He ignored them all. Instead, he opened his laptop and typed Lieutenant General Robert Washington into a search engine. Hundreds of results appeared. Articles about Washington's military career, his leadership during overseas operations, his advocacy for veteran support programs, his work with youth in underserved communities. Wilson clicked through the articles, reading about the man he had held at gunpoint. With each new piece of information, his shame deepened. This wasn't just about pointing a gun at a high-ranking officer. It was about what had led him to draw his weapon in the first place. For the first time, Wilson was forced to confront an uncomfortable question. Would he have reacted the same way if the driver had been white? The answer kept him awake long into the night. 3 days into his administrative leave, Wilson's apartment had become a prison. Takeout containers littered the coffee table. Unwashed dishes filled the sink. The blinds remained drawn against both sunlight and the occasional news van that cruised past his building. His phone had stopped ringing so often. Most people had gotten the message that he wasn't answering. Only his ex-wife persisted, leaving voicemails about their son asking questions after seeing his dad mentioned on the news. Wilson sat on his couch, staring at the department's Code of Conduct manual open on his laptop. The words blurred together after hours of reading. Internal Affairs had interviewed him twice already. Each session felt longer and more detailed than the last. Officer Wilson, can you walk us through your thought process when you first observed the vehicle? Officer Wilson, at what point did you decide to draw your weapon? Officer Wilson, would your response have been different if... That last question haunted him. Would his response have been different if the driver had been white? He wanted to say no. He wanted to believe he treated everyone the same. But the evidence was right there in the dashcam footage, his hand moving to his gun before he even had cause for concern. A knock at the door startled him. Wilson closed his laptop and moved cautiously to the entrance. Through the peephole, he saw Officer David Chen, his partner of 3 years. Wilson opened the door. "Dave." Chen looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "You look like hell, man. Thanks for the update. Why are you here? Can I come in?" Wilson stepped aside, allowing Chen to enter the cluttered apartment. Chen surveyed the mess but said nothing about it. "IA interviewed me yesterday." Wilson's stomach tightened. "About me? About working with you? About your interactions with the public?" Chen remained standing, hands in his pockets. "They asked if I'd ever seen you treat minorities differently. And what did you say?" Wilson asked, voice barely above a whisper. Chen met his gaze directly. "I said no. That you treated everyone by the book." He paused. "But then I drove home thinking about it, and I realized maybe I haven't been paying attention." Wilson sank onto the couch. "What are you saying, Dave? Remember that traffic stop last month? College kid in the BMW? The one with the expired tags? Yeah, white kid, nervous as hell. You joked with him, calmed him down, sent him on his way with a warning." Chen sat down across from Wilson. "Week before that, same violation. Hispanic guy in a work truck. You wrote him up, full ticket." Wilson started to protest, then stopped. He remembered both incidents clearly now. "I didn't even think about it," Chen continued. "Neither did you. It's just how things happen, right? But now I'm going back through all our shifts together, and I'm seeing a pattern, man. We both are." Wilson leaned forward, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I don't consider myself—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "A racist?" Chen supplied. "None of us do. That's the problem." They sat in silence for a long moment. "The dash cam footage leaked," Chen finally said. Wilson looked up sharply. "What? It's online?" "Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. Someone in the department released it." "Jesus," Wilson breathed. "How bad is it?" "Bad. There are protests planned for tomorrow outside the station. Community leaders calling for your badge. The chief's holding a press conference in the morning." Wilson felt the room closing in around him. "They're going to fire me." "Probably," Chen agreed, not sugarcoating it. "The mayor's up for re-election. The chief wants to keep his job. You're an easy sacrifice. Thanks for the pep talk. I'm not here to make you feel better, James. I'm here because we've had each other's backs for 3 years. And I owed you the truth." Chen stood up. "And because I think maybe this is a wake-up call for both of us." After Chen left, Wilson turned on the TV. Sure enough, the story dominated the local news. The dashcam footage played in a seemingly endless loop. Wilson approaching the SUV, drawing his gun, the window lowering to reveal General Washington. Commentators debated the footage, frame by frame. Some defended Wilson, citing officer safety. Others condemned him, pointing to statistics about racial disparities in policing. Social media erupts in judgment. Wilson turned off the TV and picked up his phone. 12 missed calls from his mother. 3 from his ex-wife. 1 from a number he didn't recognize. On impulse, he dialed his son's number. "Dad?" His son's voice was guarded, uncertain. "Hey, buddy. How are you doing?" "Fine." A pause. "Mom said you're in trouble at work." Wilson closed his eyes, unsure what to say. "How do you explain unconscious bias to a 12-year-old? I made a mistake at work." "A big one. I saw you on Instagram. They're saying you're racist." The word from his son's mouth hit Wilson like a physical blow. "What do you think?" he asked, dreading the answer. "I don't know," his son said honestly. "You've always told me to treat everyone the same." Was that just talk? The question stripped away Wilson's last defenses. "No," he said, voice cracking. "It wasn't just talk. But sometimes we don't see ourselves clearly. Sometimes we mess up without even knowing why." He took a deep breath. "I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, and I'm going to try to make it right. How? I don't know yet. But I'm working on it." After hanging up, Wilson sat in silence for a long time. Then he opened his laptop again, but instead of reviewing the department manual, he typed "understanding implicit bias" into the search bar. General Washington stood at the podium facing a room full of reporters. Camera flashes popped like lightning. Behind him stood Colonel Patterson and several senior military officers, their faces carefully neutral. "I'll make a brief statement and then take a few questions," Washington began, his deep voice commanding immediate attention. 3 days ago, I was pulled over by a police officer who approached my vehicle with his weapon drawn. This incident has generated significant media attention and public concern. I understand that many people are angry on my behalf." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. I share that concern about how this incident reflects broader issues in our society. However, I want to be clear. I am not calling for this officer's termination. Instead, I am requesting a meeting with police department leadership to discuss how this incident might serve as a catalyst for positive change. A murmur ran through the press corps. This was not the statement they had expected. "General Washington," called out one reporter when the question period began, "are you saying the officer should face no consequences for his actions?" "I'm saying that consequences should be constructive, not merely punitive," Washington replied. "Throughout my military career, I've learned that mistakes, even serious ones, can become valuable teaching moments when addressed properly." "But sir," another reporter pressed, "wasn't this more than a mistake? Wasn't this racial profiling?" Washington nodded slowly. "The footage certainly suggests bias played a role in the officer's decision-making. That's precisely why I want to meet with him and his superiors. If we simply fire every officer who displays bias without addressing the underlying issues, nothing changes." "Are you concerned your position might be seen as too lenient?" asked a third reporter. "I'm concerned with finding solutions, not feeding outrage," Washington said firmly. "My 30 years of military service have taught me that leadership sometimes means taking unexpected paths. The easy response would be to demand this officer's badge. The harder, but ultimately more valuable response is to use this incident to create lasting change." As the press conference concluded, Colonel Patterson leaned in. "Bold move, sir. Not everyone will understand it." "They don't need to understand it yet," Washington replied quietly. "They just need to see where it leads." Wilson watched the press conference on his laptop, stunned. The man he had held at gunpoint was now speaking up, not for his punishment, but for a chance at redemption. His phone rang, the unknown number from earlier. Wilson hesitated, then answered. "Officer Wilson?" The voice was unfamiliar, professional. "This is Major Anthony Williams, aide to Lieutenant General Washington. The General has requested a meeting with you and your department leadership tomorrow at 1400 hours. Are you available to attend?" Wilson's hand tightened around the phone. "He wants to meet with me? Why?" "The General believes there's an opportunity here, Officer Wilson, for both personal and institutional growth. Will you accept the invitation?" Wilson looked around his apartment, at the mess reflecting his internal state, at the books and articles on bias he'd begun reading, at the notebook where he'd started writing down uncomfortable truths about himself. He thought about his son's question. Was that just talk? "Yes," Wilson said, his voice steadier than it had been in days. "I'll be there." The police headquarters conference room felt impossibly small to Wilson as he sat rigidly in his chair, waiting. Captain Rivera sat beside him, reviewing notes with the police chief and the department's legal counsel. None of them spoke to Wilson directly. He was simultaneously the reason for this meeting and invisible within it. "They're here," announced a uniformed officer at the door. Wilson's heart hammered against his ribs as General Washington entered the room, followed by Colonel Patterson and a civilian woman carrying a leather portfolio whom Wilson didn't recognize. Everyone stood except Wilson, whose legs suddenly felt too weak to support him. "General Washington," the police chief said, extending his hand. "Thank you for suggesting this meeting." Washington shook the chief's hand firmly. "Chief Harris, thank you for accommodating my request." His eyes moved to Wilson, who finally managed to stand. "Officer Wilson." "Sir," Wilson said, his voice barely audible. He extended his hand automatically, then hesitated, unsure if the gesture would be welcomed. Washington grasped Wilson's hand without hesitation. His grip was strong, his gaze direct and evaluating. "I appreciate your willingness to be here today." They all took their seats around the conference table. The tension in the room was palpable. "Before we begin," Washington said, "I'd like to introduce Dr. Grace Thornton, Director of Community Relations at the Pentagon and a specialist in implicit bias training." The woman nodded. "Thank you for having me." Chief Harris cleared his throat. "General, while we appreciate your unique approach to this situation, I want to be clear that our internal investigation is ongoing. Officer Wilson's actions are being thoroughly reviewed according to department policy." "I understand," Washington replied, "and I'm not here to interfere with that process. I'm here because I believe there's an opportunity to turn an unfortunate incident into a catalyst for meaningful change." The chief looked skeptical, but nodded for Washington to continue. "Officer Wilson," Washington said, turning his attention directly to the man who had pointed a gun at him days earlier. "I'd like to hear from you. Not about the incident itself, that's well documented. I want to know what you've been thinking about since it happened." Wilson felt every eye in the room on him. His mouth went dry. He had prepared notes, rehearsed what he might say, but now those practiced words seemed hollow. "I've been thinking about why," he said finally. "Why I reacted the way I did. And the answer isn't comfortable." He paused, gathering courage. "I saw a black man in a vehicle with tinted windows and I made assumptions. I didn't consciously think, this person is dangerous because of his race. But somewhere in my mind that connection was made." The room was silent. No one interrupted. "I've spent 15 years believing I treat everyone the same," Wilson continued. "But when I've forced myself to really look back at my record, at my interactions, that's not entirely true." His voice cracked slightly. "I thought being a good cop meant not seeing color. But maybe that meant I wasn't seeing my own biases either." Washington studied Wilson thoughtfully. "That's a difficult realization to come to, Officer Wilson. Many never do." Wilson met the general's gaze. "Why did you want to meet with me, sir?" "You have every right to demand my badge." "Because firing you doesn't solve the real problem," Washington said simply. "It might satisfy public outcry, but it wouldn't address the systemic issues that led to our encounter." Dr. Thornton opened her portfolio. "If I may, this is where our proposal comes in." Chief Harris frowned. "Proposal?" "General Washington has suggested a collaborative program between your department and the military," Dr. Thornton explained. "A comprehensive approach to addressing implicit bias in policing, not just through traditional sensitivity training, but through ongoing community engagement and structural reforms. And Officer Wilson would be part of this." "Program?" Rivera asked, speaking for the first time. "At the center of it," Washington confirmed. "His experience, both the incident itself and his subsequent self-examination, makes him uniquely positioned to speak to other officers." Wilson blinked in surprise. "You want me to talk to other officers about this?" "About your journey," Dr. Thornton clarified. "About recognizing and confronting your own biases. It's one thing to hear about implicit bias from academics or diversity consultants. It's quite another to hear it from a fellow officer who's been forced to confront it in himself." The chief leaned back, clearly conflicted. "While this is an interesting proposal, General, I can't ignore the public pressure for decisive action. The community is demanding accountability." "Accountability doesn't have to mean punishment alone," Washington countered. "It can also mean taking responsibility and working toward real change. That's what I'm proposing here." The discussion continued for nearly 2 hours. At times, it grew heated as department officials raised concerns about public perception, union rules, and legal implications. Throughout it all, Wilson noticed, Washington remained calm and resolute, neither backing down nor becoming confrontational. As the meeting drew to a close, the chief stood. "I'll need to discuss this with the mayor and city council. I can't make any promises, General." "I understand," Washington replied, "but I hope you'll consider the potential impact. Not just for your department, but as a model for others around the country." The group began to disperse. Wilson remained seated, still processing everything he'd heard. To his surprise, Washington took the chair beside him as the others filed out. "You're quiet, Officer Wilson," Washington observed. "I'm trying to understand why you're doing this," Wilson admitted. "After what I did, let me tell you a story," Washington interrupted gently. "When I was a young lieutenant fresh out of West Point, I had a commanding officer who was tough as nails. During a training exercise, I made a critical error that could have gotten people killed in a real combat situation." He paused. "I expected to be reprimanded, maybe even demoted. Instead, this officer sat me down and said, 'Washington, I'm not interested in punishing you. I'm interested in making you better.'" Wilson listened intently. "That lesson stayed with me throughout my career." Washington continued. "The military isn't perfect. We've faced our own struggles with racism, discrimination, bias, but at our best, we understand that the goal isn't to weed out every person who makes a mistake. It's to build better soldiers, better leaders, better people." "And you think I can be better?" Wilson asked quietly. "I know you can," Washington said firmly. "The fact that you're sitting here, that you've been honestly examining your actions instead of making excuses, that tells me everything I need to know about your potential. The question is, are you willing to do the hard work?" Before Wilson could answer, Washington's aide appeared at the door. "Sir, we need to leave for your next appointment." Washington stood. "Think about it, Officer Wilson. This isn't just about saving your job. It's about being part of something meaningful." He extended his hand once more. "I'll be in touch." After Washington left, Wilson remained in the conference room alone. Through the window, he could see protesters still gathered outside the building, their signs visible even from a distance. "Fire racist cops," read one. "Accountability now," declared another. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "News says you met with the general today." "How did it go?" Wilson stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How had it gone? He had walked into that room expecting to be part of a formality before his inevitable firing. Instead, he'd been offered a path forward, not an easy one, but a path nonetheless. He typed back, "It opened my eyes. I'll call you tonight to explain." As Wilson finally left the conference room, he passed the department's community bulletin board. A flyer caught his eye. "Town hall meeting, police and community relations, tomorrow, 7 p.m. In the past, Wilson would have walked right by. These community meetings were usually attended by the same handful of officers who volunteered for everything, looking to pad their promotion files. He had always found excuses not to go. After a moment's hesitation, Wilson took a picture of the flyer with his phone. It would be uncomfortable facing the community after everything that had happened, but maybe that was exactly why he needed to be there. For the first time since the incident, Wilson felt something beyond shame and fear. It wasn't exactly hope, not yet, but it was a sense that maybe, just maybe, his biggest mistake didn't have to be the end of his story. It could be the beginning of a different one. 6 months later, Wilson stood at the back of the community center gymnasium, watching people file in for the evening's presentation. Folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows, most already filled. At the front, a projector displayed the program title, Building Trust Police and Community Partnership Initiative. "Nervous?" asked Officer Chen, appearing beside him. Wilson nodded. "Terrified. You've done this a dozen times now. And I still feel like throwing up before each one," Wilson admitted. "But in a good way, I think." The past 6 months had transformed Wilson's life in ways he never could have predicted. After that meeting with General Washington, things had moved quickly. The department, facing intense public pressure and seeing an opportunity to demonstrate reform, had approved the collaborative program. Wilson's disciplinary process had concluded with a suspension rather than termination, with the condition that he become actively involved in the new initiative. The first few weeks had been brutal. Many officers viewed him as a traitor for acknowledging his biases publicly. Community members saw him as the face of everything wrong with policing. His ex-wife had concerns about their son being exposed to the controversy. There were days when Wilson questioned whether it might have been easier to simply lose his job and disappear. But gradually, something shifted. The honest conversations, painful as they were, began to matter. Other officers started coming to him privately, admitting their own moments of bias. Community members who initially shouted him down began to listen when they saw he was genuinely committed to change. Now, 6 months in, Wilson was still wearing his badge, but his role had evolved. While he still patrolled occasionally, much of his time was dedicated to the program that had become known informally as the Washington Initiative. "There he is," Chen said, nodding toward the entrance. General Washington entered the gymnasium, accompanied by Dr. Thornton and several other officers involved in the program. Despite having worked together for months, Wilson still felt a flutter of nerves whenever he saw the general. The memory of their first encounter, Wilson pointing his gun at Washington, would never fully fade. Washington spotted Wilson and made his way over. "Officer Wilson, ready for tonight?" "As ready as I'll ever be, sir," Washington smiled. "You'll do fine. Just speak your truth, like always." Chief Harris called the meeting to order, welcoming the community members and introducing the program. Wilson barely heard the words. His focus was on the faces in the audience, some hostile, some curious, some cautiously hopeful. When it was his turn to speak, Wilson approached the podium slowly. The room fell silent. He looked down at his prepared notes, then set them aside. 6 months ago, I pointed my gun at a man who had done nothing wrong. He began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I did it because somewhere in my mind, I had made unconscious connections between skin color and danger. I didn't think of myself as racist. I still struggle with that label. But I've come to understand that bias doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides in the split-second decisions we make without thinking. He paused, scanning the audience. I could have lost my job. Many people think I should have. But thanks to General Washington's extraordinary grace, I was given another path, not just to keep my badge, but to examine why I did what I did, and to help other officers do the same. For the next 20 minutes, Wilson shared what he had learned over the past 6 months. He talked about the patterns he had discovered in his own policing, the different standards he had unconsciously applied to different communities. He discussed the defensive reactions he'd initially had when confronted with evidence of his bias. And he outlined the changes in policy and training that were beginning to take root in the department. This isn't about making officers feel guilty, he emphasized. It's about making us better at our jobs. When we recognize our biases, we make safer decisions. We build trust with the communities we serve. We remember why most of us put on the badge in the first place, to protect everyone equally. When Wilson finished, the applause was not thunderous, but it was genuine. As he returned to his seat, an elderly black woman in the front row caught his eye and nodded slightly. A small gesture of acknowledgement that meant more to him than any official commendation. General Washington took the podium next, discussing the military's own ongoing efforts to address bias within its ranks and the lessons that police departments could adapt from that work. His commanding presence and thoughtful words captured the audience's attention completely. Change doesn't happen overnight, Washington concluded. Not in individuals and certainly not in institutions with decades of entrenched culture. But it does happen. One conversation, one policy, one decision at a time. What Officer Wilson and this department have begun here isn't just about addressing one incident. It's about creating a template that other departments across the country can follow. After the formal presentation ended, people gathered in small groups, asking questions and sharing experiences. Wilson found himself in conversation with a group of young black men, answering their pointed questions about police training and accountability. The exchange was uncomfortable at times, but Wilson no longer shied away from discomfort. He had learned to lean into it, recognizing it as the feeling of growth. Officer Wilson, called a familiar voice. Wilson turned to see his son approaching, accompanied by his ex-wife. They had attended several of these events, but their presence still surprised him each time. "Hey, buddy," Wilson said, embracing his son. "What did you think?" "You did good, Dad," his son said simply. His ex-wife nodded in agreement. He did. "The school is talking about having you come speak to the students. The principal thinks your story could be powerful for them." Before Wilson could respond, he felt a hand on his shoulder. General Washington stood beside him. "I don't mean to interrupt," Washington said, "but I wanted to let you know that the Pentagon has approved the expansion of our program to 5 more cities. The Justice Department is interested as well." Wilson's eyes widened. "That's fantastic news, sir." "It is," Washington agreed. "And they've requested that you be part of the implementation team. It would mean traveling to help train officers in other departments, sharing what you've learned here." He paused. "It's completely your choice, of course. You've already done more than was asked of you." Wilson looked from Washington to his son, considering what this would mean. More scrutiny, more difficult conversations, more time away from home, but also more opportunity to turn his mistake into something meaningful. "I'd be honored, sir," he said finally, "if my department approves." "They already have," Washington replied with a slight smile. "I spoke with Chief Harris this morning." As the community center began to empty, Wilson found himself standing alone with Washington for a moment. "I never properly thanked you," Wilson said quietly, "for not just ending my career that day." Washington considered this. "When that window came down and I saw your face, the shock, the immediate recognition of your mistake, I saw an opportunity. Not just for you, but for real change." He extended his hand. "Don't thank me yet, Officer Wilson. Our work is just beginning." Outside in the parking lot, the sun was setting. Wilson watched as his son kicked a rock across the asphalt, waiting by his mother's car. 6 months ago, Wilson had pointed his gun at a man because of unconscious assumptions. The moment could have ended his career, possibly even led to violence. Instead, it had become the catalyst for the most profound change of his life. He still wore his badge, But now he understood the weight of it differently, not just as a symbol of authority, but as a responsibility to face his own flaws honestly and to help others do the same. It wasn't a perfect ending. The department still had a long way to go. Communities of color still had valid reasons for distrust. Wilson himself still caught his mind making assumptions sometimes. But it was a beginning, and for now that was enough.